Shavua Tov to everyone. This week's Parsha portion is Parashat Shlach, the sending of the emissaries, the spies, the 12 representatives of every tribe of Israel that Moshe Rabbeinu sends to the land when the people arrive from Egypt through the desert to the land of Israel. And prior to entering the land, Moshe Rabbeinu sends 12 emissaries to go and spy, tour the land, and see if it's suitable for their tribes. A very famous story that appears in the Torah. Now, within this story, in the beginning of the story, the Torah describes how Moshe Rabbeinu prayed, especially blessed and prayed for Yoshua bin Nun, his trusted student, who was one of the emissaries that he sent. Now, as we all know, the way this story unfolded, it was not so positive, and 10 of the 12 emissaries actually pivoted up against Moshe Rabbeinu, against God's will. And it was one of our archetype primordial sins, this story of Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the 12 spies. Now, other than Yoshua bin Nun, the emissary Moshe Rabbeinu blesses here in the beginning of the story, there was another emissary who didn't fall to this scheme of the tribes, of the other heads of the tribes. His name is Kalev ben Yefuneh. Now, a question is asked very often by a lot of the interpreters of the Torah, that why did Moshe Rabbeinu only bless Yoshua? First of all, you could ask, why didn't he bless all of the emissaries? Why didn't he pray? It says that he prayed for Yoshua, Hashem Yoshia otcha me'atzat meraglim, that Kadosh Baruch Hu should save you from this conspiring conspiracy of the meraglim, of the other emissaries. So why didn't he pray for all the emissaries? And even if all the other emissaries weren't worthy or some such answer, then why doesn't he pray for Kalev? Now, another thing that's mentioned in Chazal is that during the procedure of the 40 days that they were spying through the land, it says that Kalev himself, he went to Hebron to pray at our ancestors' tombs. So, and Yoshua didn't go. So we see that Kalev prays for himself. Yoshua, Moshe Rabbeinu prays for him. And Kalev prays for himself, and the other spies, they don't pray at all. And also, again, they fall into this conspiracy. They pivot themselves up against the will and the purpose of this shlichut, of this calling that they were given to. And they make a horrible mistake, a sin. And they also carry a lot of the people, or the whole people, around and pivot everyone up against Moshe Rabbeinu. So this question is asked in the interpretations of the Torah. Why doesn't Moshe Rabbeinu pray for everyone? Now in the Ishbitz, in Mea Shilach of this week, so he contemplates on this, and through contemplating, he also surfaces a beautiful insight on prayer that we can all take to ourselves in life. He says that, we're squeezing out of it the point, that what comes out of how he explains this scenario in the Torah is that there are three types of mentalities or states of mind in the background of prayer, of why a person prays. So the first state of mind that one can allude to, maybe like a tzaddik, a very lofty state of mind, is where a person lives constantly in the shade of Hashem. So if I were very sensitive to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence and what Hashem wants of me, so maybe some of us can imagine such a mentality in very lofty parts of our life, on Yom Kippur, or in a very, very strong point of life where Hashem's will and presence is very vivid. So it says the Ishbitzer that when a person lives this way, and if you can imagine maybe a great tzaddik who has a certain constant like this in his life, so prayer isn't so relevant. I mean, in a sense, in such a state of mind, you could describe his entire mentality as a constant prayer. He's constantly aware of Hashem, he's constantly sensitive to Hashem's will, and he's constantly driven by that sensitivity. So all of his persona, all of his self, is a constant drive in the light of Hashem's presence. But a prayer, as we describe it, again, simply, like the intuitive idea of what me and you would think of prayer, like a periodical pause in life to turn and notice HaKadosh Baruch Hu and give thanks to Hashem, or just discourse with Hashem. So again, if you imagine a person who's constantly aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the simple meaning of prayer isn't relevant to him. Again, like we said, you could imagine that his whole life is a constant prayer. There's such a concept in Chazal that a person could live this way. But the simple meaning of prayer isn't relevant to him. Now, on the other edge of this pinnacle here, you can imagine the opposite. That there's a person who's so self-involved and he lacks sensitivity so utterly to Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence. He's so involved with himself and his successes and everything, any success he has, so he credits to himself. And I think that is not successful. So again, he doesn't crack his ego or his sense of self-righteousness and self-independence enough to awaken a needy turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the simple meaning or appearance of prayer in our lives is a certain neediness, like an expression of our awareness of our lackings, our imperfections, where we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help or for guidance, or just for the sake of turning to someone. But in order for that to happen, there has to be a certain self-awareness. A person needs to be aware of his imperfections. Now, if I walk around with enough of a self-righteous notion, and my sense of self is, again, lacks blemishes so much, so there is no intuitive instinct to pray. Prayer seems something which could happen to a lot of us very often, periodically in life, where prayer seems very synthetic, very imposing, uncomfortable. Why? Because when I lack a natural sense of imperfection, a sense of neediness and dependence, where I lack all these experiences, so turning to Hashem, turning to anyone actually, turning out of myself when I'm so self-involved, is unnatural. So also a person in this sort of mentality, he also doesn't feel a natural inclination to pray. From the other edge of things, so we have these two edges here, where a person is either so sensitive that his awareness of Hashem is constant, or the opposite, the person is so self-involved that he lacks the cracks in his ego, the sensitivity of himself, in order to awaken a natural tendency to turn to Hashem and spill his heart and ask for whatever it is that he wants to ask for, just to turn out of himself. So both edges don't ensue a prayer. They don't ignite a longing to pray to Hashem. So who prays? Who's the person who naturally or classically would pray to Hashem? It's a person who's in between these two edges, a person who is on the one hand, again, not so utterly devoted and constantly aware and, again, concentrated on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence to be carried away by that constantly, on the one hand. But on the other hand, he's not so self-indulged and self-righteous to be completely oblivious to his imperfections. So he has a constant turmoil within himself. On the one hand, he's aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence and HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, but the volume isn't that so high to carry him away. But on the other hand, he's also aware of his imperfections, his impurities, and therefore there are all sorts of cracks in his sense of self. So he's constantly turning back and forth, pivoting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and going back to himself, and back and forth that way. And this person is the pulse of prayer of life. So this is how the Ishbitzer describes these three categories that appear in this parasha. That Yoshua bin Nun is like, he's clinging to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's one of the people of Moshe Rabbeinu. He's constantly connected to this flow of Hashem's presence. He's like a tzaddik. But he also doesn't pray because, again, his consciousness is like a flow. So it's not a natural, needy human prayer. On the other hand, the Meraglim were so self-righteous and so involved within themselves, they lacked the lowliness and the sensitivity to their own flaws to feel that they need to pray. So they also didn't feel a need to pray. Only Kalev was tilting in between the sensitivity to Hashem's will and also enough sensitivity to his own blemishes that he felt this need, this urge to go and pray. And that's how he describes the praying man in this parsha portion. That a person, this is a very daily phenomenon. You don't always feel like praying. There isn't always such a notion, even if I'm a practicing Jew, or a man at least, is obligated to pray 3 times a day. Now, maybe sometimes it just doesn't. It's not happening. It's not flowing naturally. So the Ishbitzer says you need to contemplate and see why is that? Is it because you're so devoted and you're so involved in Hashem's shlichut in life now that you're in such a drive that you don't even notice yourself, so you don't feel that need? Or the opposite, you're so self-indulged, so self-righteous that you lack any sensitivity to your lackings, so then you don't feel this need to pray. So a feeling that prayer isn't natural, which again is a typical, very common feeling that seems synthetic, is a reflection of one of these two edges. And so if it's because of this utter self-righteousness that I entertain, so maybe my prayer should involve, or at least prior to my prayer, there should be a certain contemplation on oneself, like to awaken my sensitivity to my imperfections, so that I feel a natural yearning and need to turn to Hashem. But the person who feels like praying, like if you feel like praying suddenly, that's like Kalev ben Yefuneh's consciousness. That's coming from these healthy cracks in your ego, and also some sensitivity to Hashem's presence. And that middle place is maybe the most natural place for all of us. There's not likely is this mentioned in the entrance to Eretz Yisrael. You come into Eretz Yisrael and you start building the country. The whole story of the emissaries is how the Jewish people enter Eretz Yisrael. So when you come to Eretz Yisrael, this land is a place where you can do earthly things. You can build the land, but it's done with enough sensitivity. Even the circumstances of life in Israel, they are such that they expose our sensitivity to Hashem, so that we constantly feel a yearning, a natural yearning, whilst at work, whilst building the world, building a Kadosh Baruch Hu's dwelling place in this world. So in a sense, you turn away from Hashem when you do that. But when you do it in Eretz Yisrael, so Kadosh Baruch Hu is in the land. So you never turn away from Hashem. And therefore, whilst you're doing it, you feel a constant need to turn to Hashem and pray for your success, to pray for Him to be fond, to take a nice eye on what we're doing here. Again, so this is the middle awareness that is typical to Kalev ben Yefuneh, that represents a natural prayer, a natural flowing prayer. B'ezrat Hashem, we should all be blessed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that to be sensitive enough to ourselves and to Him, that we find a pulsing in our lives, that periodically we feel a natural yearning to turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's a healthy, good, balanced dynamic. B'ezrat Hashem, we should all find ourselves praying naturally and happily to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.